All right. Hello, everybody. We are going to talk about the first phase of the French Revolution today. But before we do that, I want to look at what happened yesterday. So previously in the French Revolution, what I want you to do is see if you can figure out what each of these pictures are and what role did they play in the early revolution. I'll give you a hint. They don't all match up to the three steps that it took to get us to the revolution necessarily, but see if you can figure out what the images are. Go ahead. Okay, so hopefully you talked with your partner. If you didn't, go ahead and do it now and pause again. Okay. Up here we have the tennis court oath. Here we have the storming of the Bastille. And down here, the Great Fear, that I think is the toughest one to get. So we're picking up where we left off yesterday, which essentially was after the Bastille. Louis ordered the First and Second Estate to join the National Assembly, to join the Third Estate's group. And so today we're going to be talking about the first phase, the liberal phase of the revolution. There's three phases of the three phases of the revolution: liberal, radical, and then moderate or conservative, depending, and we'll discuss about that later. This is the first phase. This is liberal. Now, it's considered liberal because it is not a monarchy. Okay? And so, if you remember yesterday, we said the Third Estate vowed not to break up. The tennis court oath vowed not to disband until they wrote a constitution. This is the constitution they wrote. And what constitution is that from your reading last night? Yes, it's the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Okay, this very important document, this very significant document. This is a liberal government that they are trying to set up. This takes a lot of the ideas of the Enlightenment, a lot of lessons learned from the American Revolution and the American documents. This is the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which I think is a key word there. Now, what type of government did it establish? It established a constitutional monarchy. Now, one thing I will mention, though, is that this government never actually goes into effect. This constitution is significant, it's important, but it never actually goes into effect because, spoilers, some things are going to come along that kind of change events along. Now, one of the first things that the National Assembly does, besides making the Constitution, is they try to pass some economic issues, some economics and tax and social policies. And so they're trying to make some of the changes that made them so upset. One of the first things they do is basically undo feudalism. They're getting rid of all hereditary and feudal privileges, these things that are the heart of peasant discontent and noble wealth. And so this is the first step. It's all not going to completely come undone for a few years, but this is the start. I also know most of this wasn't in your reading, so make sure you're taking a look at this. They're trying to resolve the tax issues. If you remember that chart from our Absolutism is a Myth, or the map rather, the Absolutism is a Myth of France, that there was all these different tax privileges and regions and towns. They're erasing that. They're taking the first steps to nationalize the Catholic Church. They are ending the tithe, which, James, I know you brought up yesterday. They're creating a paper currency. The assignée is how it's pronounced. I've been corrected many, many times. And so this is trying to address that central bank issue. They are also trying to increase popular participation, getting more people to vote, allowing people to vote, allowing people to run for office. And so all together, I think a few important points should be made, that these are all Enlightenment principles, that these are all reason-based principles, and a lot of them are against the church. They're only really possible because they're taking church properties and taking church land. And so that's why they're able to make a lot of these things happen. And that's going to be a feature that we see kind of roll through the revolution here. So next, we're going to look at another political cartoon, one that it looks familiar, but it's a little bit different. Sorry about that. So we see a cartoon that looks familiar to us. Only this one, there's a couple things going on here. So first of all, the caption at the bottom says, "I knew it would be my turn." If you remember the one we looked at yesterday, said, "I hope this doesn't last long, or I hope I get my turn soon." So first of all, talk about what's going on, who the characters are, and then we'll talk about what he is saying up there. So talk about who each of the people are and what that represents and why it's different from the one you guys loved that we saw so much yesterday. So did we get that? Peasant is on top, the nobility, the clergy. Peasant has a sword, he has a hare, a rabbit, so he can hunt. They're carrying the load for him. But I also want to look up at this. Vive le roi, vive la nation. Long live the king, long live the nation. And I think that's an important point because at this stage in the revolution, this liberal phase, don't forget they're putting in a constitution still. And they still think the king serves a purpose. A lot of the people still like the king, still want the king around. And so I think that's a valid point here. But now we're getting another event, and this is a big I shouldn't say turning point. This is a big moment in the revolution, the Women's Bread March. Your reading talked about this a little bit. Take like a quick 30 seconds with your partner and talk about what happened here. Talk about the Women's Bread March. Go ahead. Okay, so the price of bread, if you remember, we looked at that chart yesterday, just keeps going up and up and up and up. And it was very difficult. Women were responsible for getting the food for every day. And in Paris, still to this day, most people would shop for their bread in the morning. They would go get it first thing in the morning. You'd just get fresh bread just for that day. And essentially what happens with the Women's Bread Marches, and each neighborhood has their own local market, their own store. And one woman started talking to another about the price of bread and how they can't believe it, and how it's so expensive. And if they could just let the king know, they would give him a piece of it in buy. And then somebody else was like, "Yeah, I wish we could do that." And then another woman was there, and then another. And then they started getting angrier and angrier, and they started going through town, and they started marching. Then they started grabbing weapons, and then they started adding more people, and then they went up to Montmartre. The people from the top of the hill grabbed a cannon, and they're like, "Cannon. You know what? We're going to go to Versailles, and we're going to let the king know exactly what's going on because he and his queen are just sitting there all comfy in their palace, and they don't know what the heck is going on, and we want to let them know." And so they do. They drag weapons, their mob grows, they have cannon, and they head to Versailles. They march the miles to Versailles. You can just picture them getting angrier and hot and cranky as they are getting closer and closer to Versailles. And I always like to picture the guards outside of Versailles. It's probably usually pretty easy duty. They're just hanging out. And then all of a sudden they, see turn the corner and they're like, "Oh, sacre bleu," as this mob of angry women streams towards them. Now, this is a worthwhile moment to tell a Marie Antoinette story, okay? Marie Antoinette was not very popular with the French people. She was Austrian, so she was bound to be not popular. She never really took to her people that much. They never took to her. This is where the story comes in, that when the mob was coming towards the Palace of Versailles, she asked one of her aides, like, "What is going on? What's wrong?" And somebody told her, "They are hungry, sir. They're hungry, ma'am. Sorry, there is no bread." And she supposedly said, "Well, if there's no bread, then let them eat cake." The implication of this story, of course, is that she was so out of it and so detached from her people that she didn't know that it meant if they don't have bread, they're starving to death. That's the staple of their food. That's what they're eating. And she was so separate from them that she thought, well, then why wouldn't they just eat cake? Because that's her world. Now, the story didn't actually happen. She wasn't an idiot. She knew what that meant. But again, much like the Catherine the Great story, it shows us what people thought of her, the jokes, the story, the rumors. Um, and then I just love how the College Board um, says it. Women enthusiastically participated in the early phases of the revolution, and like so calmly and plainly juxtaposed with this violent mob of armed women. I just get a kick out of that. So next, I want to take a quick look at foreign reaction. What is going on inside of each country as they're looking at this? So basically, what we're going to see is England is very early on anti-revolutionary. They don't like this. They don't trust this. They're worried about it. And the English Prime Minister, Edmund Burke, who's going to be the founder of modern conservatism, he is the English Prime Minister, and he is very much early against this. Now, this might strike you as odd because England, as we know, is fairly liberal as compared to the rest of the continent. But I think it's important to know that this revolution is elevating or is bringing down landowners. The revolution in France is bringing down landowners, is leveling the field against landowners. And that is something that England does not want to spread. So early on, they are very much against it. Prussia is not particularly interested in it. They don't think anything is going to involve them at all. If anything, Austria is looking at it curiously and interested in, okay, it's a weaker France. That's good. Although the Austrian emperor is worried for his daughter, who is Marie Antoinette, because that's what European families do. I think everybody wants to turn it back to a monarchy. Not I think. I know everybody wants to turn it back to a monarchy. But nobody's particularly worried at this stage. And nobody's really worried that anything is going to spread from this point forward. So now we come to a pretty significant turning point in this early phase of the revolution. Your reading mentioned this briefly, the flight to Varennes. Basically, Louis and his family are going to try to make a break for it. They are under house arrest in Paris, having been brought back by the Women's Bread March. They're comfortable, they're fine, but they don't like it. And so Louis and his family decide they're going to make a break for it. Now, here's the real brutal thing. This is another aspect. So they're going to make a break for the Spanish Netherlands, the Austrian Netherlands at this point. And it is a completely bungled escape attempt. They're supposed to leave at like midnight when it's the darkest of the dark, and they have the whole dark night to go. But Marie Antoinette and Louis refuse to leave without a ton of packing and a ton of supplies and a ton of their clothes and personal effects. So much so that the carriage that had been secured to get them out wasn't big enough. And the guy who was helping them escape had to try to find another carriage that was bigger. And this took hours and hours, and then getting loaded, and they weren't ready to go. And it gets so just absolutely brutal that rumors of the king and the royal family and the queen escaping actually leave Paris before the king and queen do. And people begin lining the road to see them go. And so it, of course, gets caught. They, of course, get caught. The whole thing blows up. And it's really quite ugly. And this is a big turning point because, that cartoon that we looked at just a few ago said, long live the king and long live the nation. And now here's Louis trying to flee to Austrian lands, trying to flee to his wife's kingdoms, his wife's family's lands. And this breaks a bond. This is undoable. People were questioning: did he abdicate the throne? Did he give it up by doing this? Is this an illegal act? Like, what is? This is a major turning point. And again, just another example of Louis making a wrong decision, or even making a right decision, but at the wrong time, or making it poorly, or all of the above. While this is happening, we have a new government taking over. This is called the Legislative Assembly. So just as a quick timer, we had the Third Estate, Third state forms the National Assembly. That National Assembly said, we are only going to remain in place until we write a constitution. That was the tennis court oath. And they did. The Constitution was a Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. And that Constitution established the Legislative Assembly. Okay? So this Legislative Assembly is the new government. Now, the key for us is membership in this new government. They made a rule. The National Assembly made a rule that anybody who is in the National Assembly is not allowed to be in the Legislative Assembly. Basically, they were doing a very honorable thing. They were saying, we are making the rules. We in the National Assembly are making the rules. And if we are making the rules in this Constitution, in this new government, we shouldn't get to play by those rules. That's not fair, because we could make the rules to benefit ourselves. We've seen that done before. I mean, sometimes governments do that. The people who make them to benefit themselves. And so they did a very honorable thing and said, we are making these rules, so we're not going to play by them, which is awesome. But here's the thing now, the membership of the Legislative Assembly now, let's put it this way. The National Assembly was the A team. The National Assembly was the best Paris, France, in general had to offer. They're the ones who are putting all of these ideas into order. None of them can be in the Legislative Assembly. Generally speaking, the Legislative Assembly is three things. They are less experienced, they are younger, and they are more radical. That's going to be a seemingly useless bit of information that comes into play later. Okay, now, at the same time, this is all happening. We have a population emerging that we call the immigrants. The emigres, well, I'll let you read that. This wasn't in your reading at all, but I want you to know who these people are. They play a role in the revolution. So take a moment and read. Okay, so the big question is, what are they going to have? What role are they going to play? Well, essentially, they play this outsized role because they are influential people. They are rich people. They want to turn back the revolution. They have influence in courts all around Europe, in royal courts in Austria, in Prussia. They have influence in England. And so these guys are, it's going to be a pressure group on the revolution. Now, that outside pressure is going to be a very significant part of the revolution, not just from the immigrants, but in general. And a really important part of understanding the French Revolution is understanding the role war plays and these outside pressures play. So the War of the First Coalition, this was the war described in your reading, was Prussia and Austria, key, funded by Great Britain. Great Britain is paying all this money for Prussian and Austrian soldiers to go fight France. And their goal was to replace the monarchy, to put the monarchy back in charge in France. They wanted to make sure this fledgling government didn't take hold. And I don't underestimate the role that Marie Antoinette, through her daddy, played in pushing this war and getting this war happen. That the emigres played, and just kind of anti-French feelings also. But they wanted the king back. And I think a really important part to understand is this war is going really, really badly for France. They're disorganized. They have an inexperienced government. The army, who's the army fighting for? Is it the king? Who is this? Who is that? The war is going very, very badly. And the fear is if they lose this war, the revolution will fail. The constitution that they just wrote, the gains that they're making, the plans that they have will be undone. And that is a very, very real fear. And it's realistic that if the armies of Prussia and Austria were able to roll through, they would have been able to undo the revolution. And then they kind of overplay their hand a little bit. In your reading, it talked about the Declaration of Pilntz, P-I-L-N-T-Z. I would rather talk about the Brunswick Manifesto because I think they are. I think that one's more important, but whatever. So go ahead and take a look, read this slide, and look at the cartoon real quick, and then we'll come back and talk. I'm sorry, make sure you talk with your partner about what the Brunswick Manifesto, the Declaration of Prince, what effect it had on the French people, and then make sure you look at the cartoon too. It's pretty awesome. So this matter that was this announcement that was supposed to intimidate the French people and intimidate the Parisians, in fact, had the opposite effect because it was essentially even if some Parisians didn't support the revolution or support these changes, they sure didn't support a Prussian army coming in. They sure didn't support the Prussians telling them what to do. So for me, this is always like, that you can make fun of my sibling or sorry, set up. I can make fun of my sibling, but if you make fun of my sibling, then we're going to have words. You're not allowed to do that. So this is the French people, being like, we might not like this government, but you cannot say anything to us about that. And so this is going to spur on some action, spur on some violence, eventually getting us to the storming of the Tuileries Palace, which is where the king was staying under house arrest since the flight to Varennes. Um, they were angry at the Declaration of Prince. They were angry at the king's flight to Varennes. They were afraid the foreign armies were going to come in and undo the revolution. They were afraid the revolution was going to collapse. And so basically, some Parisians and some independent guard people, some military regiments, they stormed the palace where the king and his royal family are staying. And his Swiss guard and some of his personal guard put up fierce resistance, but they are overwhelmed. And this is an incredibly bloody, violent, and terrifying for the royal family, by the way, engagement. Eventually, the king is arrested, and he is put in actual jail now. And that is where we are going to end this phase of the revolution. And so, what I want you to talk about with your partner now to kind of close out is where are we in the revolution? And what is the future of the revolution at this point? Where do you think it's going to go? You have an early rev document activity that you'll get now that you can start working on. But first, answer those questions. Where are we now in the revolution? And what's the future of the revolution at this point? Thanks very much. You guys are awesome. And I will see you soon.